By the way, first of all, thank you for your priceless time that you give it to us and accept my invitation for sure. Not just me, all the people, near 50 people that they are here, and for sure we're gonna be much more. We are so super thankful about this event that you held it, and the floor is yours. I think we can start
Okay,
the
so
presentation.
I'll try to to share my screen again. It worked earlier, so I
Yes,
hope
yeah,
it
for
works
sure.
now as well. Okay.
But by the way, one reminders to all the guests that they are here because we have some international students. Just be in touch and connected with me in the Telegram group. Maybe if we're gonna be more than 100 people, we share you another link. You can just give out from this link and join the other one. Thank you so much, by the way.
Can you see my first slide?
Yes, yes, it's totally
Okay.
fine. Thank
Witchcraft
you.
and witches on the Jacobean stage.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
good. So thank you for the invitation. It's nice to be able to be of some use.
My pleasure.
So I was I will, well, Zara, you probably have heard all of this, so we could go out and have a coffee and then come back in an hour. But
No, I really missed your classes, to be honest.
okay, so I'm just going to speak about Macbeth at the end of my talk. At the beginning, I just wanted to talk about witches and the place these characters have, in the Jacobean, well, Elizabethan Jacobean stage. So I'm going to give an introduction of what it means to be a witch. I'm going to debunk some myths about witchcraft, and then move on the context. And then finally, I will talk briefly about Macbeth and the Tempest and plays that stage witches and what it means. So I'm going to spend a lot of time, I have to say, on the context, because I think we need to place the idea of witchcraft in the historical context of the time. Because actually, if we think of the iconography of witches, it hasn't changed much in the last few centuries, at least in the Western world. So when we think, I compared. You will see one page from a 1643 play, The Witch, and then a contemporary picture book for children, Room on the Broom. And if you compare the two witches, they're not that different after all. So both have the hat, they have the wart on their nose, they have broomsticks, familiars, animals. So we think of nowadays, when we think of witches, especially in the Western world, I'm sure that in Africa and in some areas in South America, they probably have different notions of witches. But I think in our world, probably this is the picture that we conjure when we think of witches. And you see that the Julia Donaldson picture book has called the witch is holding, he's carrying a cauldron, which was the place where witches would put ingredients to make their potions. And actually, as we were talking about food earlier on, it's interesting that there are connections between books of recipes and books of spells and potions. The world of witches is a domestic space. So in a way, putting ingredients in a cauldron to boil a love potion is a perverted way of cooking. So you can think of that kind of making magical spells with ingredients as a form of cooking in a way. But there's a lot of research on that. We won't be insisting on this, but just to make you think that it's a domestic action, that of cooking up a spell. So having said that, how can we define witchcraft? And this is one definition that we could have. So the practices of a witch or witches, especially in the use of magic or sorcery, the exercise of supernatural power supposed to be possessed by a person in league with the devil or evil spirits. And the first thing that we should remember when we think of a witch is that a witch is a person. It's not, the witches are not supernatural. Well, of course, I suppose we all agree that witches don't exist. So, I'm thinking about literary representations, of course. Witches, they're always on the border between they inhabit a no man's land between different categories. And I'm going to show you some of the categories they cross. We could define witches as, we can call them liminal beings. So liminal means, in the middle between two different things. They are complex beings. So witches are generally women, but they're not monsters. They are not supernatural, as I was saying. They belong to our world. So we could say that they are other, but they are also us. So they cross, they stand on this threshold between human and non-human. And of course, this is not unusual, because early modern culture was a culture that did not draw clear lines between several categories. So magic, superstition is one category. Some early modern writers make a connection between, and moving on to religious superstition, especially between the Catholic sacraments that had disappeared during the Reformation, and superstition. So the witch's spell, the witch's special effects were considered by some members of the Church of England like magic. So they called it sacramental magic. So it's interesting that religion and superstition at the time could be perceived as being very, very close. Now, for us, we tend to draw sharp lines between one and the other. And also, and I also added to this list another difference, astronomy and astrology, because again, at the time, this was a category that, really it wasn't that distinguished as it is now. For us, there is a strict line between the two. We may read, the horoscope in the newspaper, for fun, but astronomy is a serious discipline, it's something more serious entirely. But people in the early modern period believed that planets influenced people's behavior. They believed that they had to look at the stars to decide on the best time to plan a coronation, for example, as I'm thinking about Elizabeth I, who employed Dr. Dee, famous astrologer, mathematician, magician of the time, to decide on the day of the coronation. We'll talk about Dr. Dee in a moment. So there are a lot of complications when now we think about witches and all these early modern mental categories of the time. So in a way, I'm asking you to take a sort of a trip into a journey into a different mental world, a world in which ghosts, witches, and other supernatural beings are as real, are considered by a lot of people as real as people, other categories or other people that we can sort of touch. So having a physical body and existing and also exerting an influence over the world of man. So I'm going to now talk a bit about witches' beliefs in the early modern period, and then, as I was saying, but one of the things that I wanted to do was to debunk some myths about witches. I don't know whether you've ever read the Da Vinci Code, or maybe you've seen the movie. And Dan Brown writes in that novel that the witch craze, during the witch craze, the church burned at the stake an astounding 5 million women. Well, it might be astounding, but it's not true. This is, again, these numbers are a myth, of course. This figure, sometimes some authors say 9 million, and they're still repeated today, but they were never backed by any evidence. Of course, historians make mistakes, and then other historians repeat them. That of the millions of witches is a story of forgery. It's a story of misrepresentation, of repeating things that were never checked properly. So when historians started to look at archives, to look at reports of witch trials, things changed completely because they had a different perception of this phenomenon. So it is now estimated that in England, there were about 1,000 witch trials and about 8,000 witches were burned in Scotland, which is still a very big number and a terrible thing to do, but it's not 9 million, you see. So Europe plus America, now there are estimates of about 80,000 witches, witch trials, and most were held in Germany. So Zara, you have to be careful when you go to Germany, because you never know what might happen to you. So it's interesting that it is Germany in which the most witch trials were held, and they were concentrated in a few decades, 1560, 1630. So if we have an idea that the witch trials or the witch craze was a medieval phenomenon, you would be wrong. It's, the witches are persecuted later, a bit later, so in the 16th century especially. And another myth that I wanted to debunk today is that of witchcraft as a sort of pre-Christian pagan religion that started with Margaret Alice Murray in 1921. She wrote this very influential book, The Witch Cult in Western Europe, a Study in Anthropology, so 1921. And her point, her idea was that the devil was a sort of a Christian, pagan religion's horned dog, horned god. You see the picture there. So the idea of witches as she had this idea of witches as persecuted representatives of this pagan religion, an ancient religion that was, then persecuted by the Catholic Church. And this idea was still repeated in the 1970s. But this view of witchcraft has been completely discredited by scholars, such as these two Oxford academics, Alan Macfarlane and James Sharp, between others, and also Keith Thomas. I didn't put his cover here. And they were the first to check evidence of the witches' trials in archives. As I was saying, archival work has changed the way we look at witches today. So they described how these trials worked and explained that a wide variety of people, stupid and intelligent, rich and poor, men and women, believed in witchcraft. So witchcraft gave these people a means of explaining the inexplicable, as we shall see in a little while. And witchcraft was a part of everyday life. So although, I'm not saying that witches were not persecuted, because they were, even if, not in millions. But the early modern society was a persecuting society. What was peculiar in England in those decades was the belief that witches threatened Christian religion and threatened Christian society. So they were a danger to society because they could use the power they had from the devil to harm people, to harm kings and queens and ordinary people. So, through the pact with the devil, they gained a lot of power and they would do bad things. This was the idea. So and this sort of coexisted with an idea that magical elements were part of life. So if your husband left you, you could go to one of these ladies and ask for a love philter. Even if they were not proper witches or not considered witches, they would still consider to have some power. Or they went to healers, people who would heal with potions, with herbs, or people who used charms to help people find a lost object. So this is a sort of it's not, I would say, proper witchcraft, but a sort of popular Christianity bordering on superstition. Remember what we said before, religion and superstition were liminal elements. So it's interesting that there's no evidence whatsoever of a pagan religion, of a pagan cult from archival work. So as I was saying, Mary's work is still repeated by, some feminists today, the idea that women were persecuted. I mean, women were persecuted, of course, but not because they were part of this pre-Christian religion. So, a lot of misconceptions there. And of course, witches were, for the most part, women. And so I'm going to talk to you briefly about this key text. This is one of the texts that made the connection between witchcraft and women. The Malleus Maleficarum, the Hammer of the Witches. It was published in 1486, and it was the work of two monks, Jacob Sprenger and Heinrich Kramer, both experienced inquisitors. They worked for the Inquisition, which was, the Catholic sort of way of accusing and then sentencing witches. And they operated in South Tyrol, which is that area between north of Italy and Austria. And they were expert inquisitors. This is sort of a handbook for inquisitors. So if somebody accuses a woman of witchcraft, you go and this is the handbook that you read. It has all the questions that you should ask. It gives you all the information that you need in order to question this poor woman. It was reprinted many times, translated. Well, of course, Latin was, the language of culture in that period in Europe. But it was really influential, and a summary of all the theories, all the theology about witchcraft until then. And as I was saying before, it's interesting because for the first time, it links witches with women. It talks about women having sex with the devil. It's very misogynistic and very sort of, there's a lot of sexual fantasy in there. You can imagine these two monks sort of thinking about, all these things that women could do with the devil. And, but it encouraged also secular authorities, not just religious authorities, to persecute witches. And this is key for England, because England it was not a religious institution that persecuted witches, but it was the state. So it was a secular institution. So what happens in England at this time? In England, as I was saying, witchcraft was persecuted by the state. So no inquisition, just local judges. So you would place your accusation, they would start the investigation, they would send these judges to the village where, somebody had been accused of witchcraft. Then if they had enough evidence, they would start a trial. And then, of course, it would result in either, innocent, possibly torture was used. And then in the end, you would have the sentence with, innocent or guilty. This is also, witchcraft is also in England something that bothers powerful people. So it bothers queens and kings, because one of the dangerous things about witches could be that they prophesied about the end of the kingdom. So prophecy, the possibility of reading into the future or reading into the seeds of time, as it says in Macbeth. So they were worried that they might tell when a king or a queen would die. And, in England, succession is always a taboo. It's a taboo element. Elizabeth I died without heirs, and so they're always on the brink of civil war when a king or a queen dies. So foretelling the end of a kingdom is always a bit dangerous. For example, if you think of Henry VIII, the father of Queen Elizabeth I, the one that had the 6 wives. Among the many accusations that were leveled against Anne Boleyn, his second wife, was witchcraft. She was accused of being bewitched. She was accused of having bewitched the king. And she was sentenced to death, not just, for witchcraft. But this was one of the accusations. So, we have to be careful, because after this time, the idea of witchcraft enters English legislation. So at some point, legislators need to produce laws and acts against witchcraft. And between 1542 to about 1604, there are 3 different acts against witchcraft, statutes they're called, against witchcraft. And everyone is more severe than the previous one. So, for example, in the first statute against witchcraft, it decreed that witchcraft was a crime only if it produced maleficium, so causing harm to people. Okay, so if you couldn't prove that some harm had been caused to people, you couldn't accuse a witch of, flying on the broom, as I'm giving you a silly example, wasn't considered an element that would make people believe that you are a witch. So it had to be proved that you had harmed somebody. So you see, it was quite difficult to prove. But as we go on towards the 2 successive acts, statutes, things become more difficult, and for a witch to for a woman to escape an accusation, because and also I would like to add more details about witchcraft enter the consciousness of the person who was writing the law. For example, in the third statute against witchcraft, it says that it was a crime to use a dead body for magical purposes. And this was not there in the previous 2 statutes. So there's a way in which the legislators start thinking about what it means to be a witch, what a witch does, and they start prohibiting things in the 3rd statute that were not prohibited in the 1st statute. So you see, there's a development from the mid-16th century to the beginning of the 17th century. So in the last statute, for example, it says, and I'm quoting from the statute, it is a crime to consult, covenant, entertain, feed, or reward any evil and wicked spirit for any intent or purpose. So this was not mentioned in the early statutes. So witchcraft starts becoming a crime with, all these details that were not there earlier. There's also an intensification of interest in magic around also in educated circles, because here we've been talking so far about village witches. So the character that would be accused of witchcraft in a village, and then, trial and so on. But witchcraft was also, in a way, an intellectual pursuit for some people. So we have to think of witchcraft as having 2 levels, the low level, let's say, of village witches, healers and so on, and then the more intellectual levels of magicians more than witches. And I mentioned Dr. D earlier, which was this interesting Renaissance scholars who would dabble with with magic. And there's a cartoon there that I show students because Dr. D and his assistant said that they could conjure angels. They would call angels in their sort of bowl. They called it the scrying stone, and you'll see it's this black mirror that you see. And it's still there, it's still visible. So it's interesting because he seems to be, a typical character of the time, an example of a Renaissance scholar who would be famous for his work in mathematics, in astrology, a man of learning. He would cast horoscopes, but he would anticipate the arrival of a comet, for example. But in 1604, we find him writing a petition. We have a petition by him asking James I to be cleared of accusations of being an invocator of devils. It's dangerous to dabble in magic. It was dangerous then because white magic and black magic are not very different. Again, think of the liminality. what if you want to call angels? You get devils. So, John Dee, who started as, a very famous and presumably well-paid astrologer at court, ended his life in misery and trying to, to clear himself of these accusations of being a black magician. And there are a lot of possible real-life parallels to Dr. Dee. One is certainly Dr. Faustus, Marlowe's protagonist of the same play, because here in Dr. Faustus, the doctor raises devils, and you see him. He's in this page. He's inside a circle of magical symbols. He has a staff and a book, and we see the devil Mephistopheles raising from a trap door, because he's, at the beginning of the play, he conjures the devil, and then he makes a pact with the devil in return for power. He's given, in return for 24 years of life, he's given power, but at the same time, after the years have expired, he has to go back to hell. So this is the pact, and you never it never works to strike a pact with the devil in literature and in life, I imagine. So the question is, did everybody believe in witches, in pacts with the devil, in alchemy, in astrology? There were some skeptical voices, not many, but there were. And so I'm going to show you this treatise by Scott, who wrote this book called The Discovery of Witchcraft. And this is a treaty written in 1584, which actually forced King James to reply with his own treaty on witchcraft, because in this interesting treaty, Scott says that witchcraft is a cozening art, and you see it in the first page there, in the first line. Witchcraft is in truth a cozening art, which means cozening means a deceiving art. It is incomprehensible to the wise and learned. So this is actually very, very modern. He says that witchcraft is the art of deception. And then he gives you a very sensible, very commonsensical explanation of the phenomenon of the village witch. And actually, he builds a sort of a scene. He says, what if, these witches, these women who are said to be witches, old, lame, I'm reading from the text there, pale, foul, and full of wrinkles. So, our image of the witch, actually. These miserable witches are so odious unto all their neighbors and so feared as few dare offend them. So these women are troublesome, So no one wants to offend them. And these are poor, marginalized women. They go from house to house and from door to door for a pot full of milk, yeast, drink, or some such relief, without the which they could hardly live. It falleth out many times that neither their necessities nor their expectations are served. So sometimes she curses one, and sometimes another. So you see, they are poor, they ask for yeast, they ask for milk, they ask for drink because they're poor, they're lonely women, they're generally unmarried. And so when they are not given what they want, they fall to cursing. They curse. They say, may your child die, may your pig die, may your crop be ruined. And these things happened at the time. It's a time of high child mortality. So, pigs die, crops are ruined, pigs get sick and die. And so they believed that the curse was real, that these women had the power to curse, to cause harm. So it's interesting that in the end, this passage ends with, doubtless at length, some of her neighbors die, or their children fall sick, which by ignorant parents are supposed to be the vengeance of witches. So we have already here a narrative or a scene in a play. The witch needs to ask for something. The neighbors resent her. They say no. They send her away. She curses them. Something bad happens and they blame her. So the follow-up could be, her neighbors telling the authorities. She might be arrested and then, she might confess. What kind of confession could they have made? And, there are scholars that believe that confessions were a sort of power, a sort of powerful moments for these witches. Well, unless they were tortured, of course, in which case they had no choice. But when they were not tortured, they would say, yes, I have the power. They were fantasy of power. I have the power over my neighbors. I can, possibly also self-deluded in some cases. So they would show that, they had this marginal power. So, and this is actually, this scene that Scott describes is actually sort of part of this play, The Witch of Edmonton. It's a play that was written in 1621, and it's a real story because there were only 5 recorded executions for witchcraft in the last 10 years of King James's reign. And one of the 5 executions was that of the protagonist of this play, Elizabeth Sawyer, or Mother Sawyer, as she's called in the play, who was hanged for witchcraft in London, because normally in England they would hang them rather than burn them. So she died in April 1621, and The Witch of Edmonton, this tragic comedy, and you can see with a lot of authors, it was a co-author of that play, tells the sort of the real life case in dramatized form, in the same ways as sometimes we have documentaries now of events or crimes. It's a sort of a docudrama in a way, based on the account of a priest, the chaplain of the jail where she was put, and he reports the interrogation. So this would be actually quite interesting to see, but you don't have time. But anyway, so here we have a situation in which a very similar situation to that described by Scott. Mother Sawyer is poor, she's wrinkly, she's old, she's always complaining, and she's gathering sticks because she needs, it's cold, and she needs, sticks for her fire. And so then Old Banks, this character, this man in the play, sends her away. He doesn't want her to pick up the sticks in this field. And so she says at the beginning, why on me? Why should the envious world throw all their scandalous malice upon me? Because I'm poor, deformed, and ignorant. Some call me witch. And so the dog that you see in the picture is her familiar. So it's an animal that witches would live with, and it was a sort of a guarantee of the pact with the devil. So you might imagine black cats as familiars, but she had a dog, and he appears the moment she says, well, everyone think that I'm a witch, so I might just as well be one. And so he appears, this devilish spirit, and of course she strikes a pact with the devil. Again, she's hoping to get power from the devil. She would like to take revenge on her neighbors, but as some of her neighbors are good Christians, they can't, the devil can't do anything to them. And so, it's interesting that both Dr. Faustus and the Witch of Edmonton, they cannot get what they want from the pact with the devil, and they both die in damnation. So they both, at the end of their life, they go to hell. But you see that here we are in the world of the village witch. With Dr. Faustus, we were in the world of the sort of intellectual magic, but in both cases, the pact with the devil doesn't seem to be working. So on stage, you would see that the devil always wins. So I'd like now, having said that, to explore briefly the English theatrical context of this time. So why witchcraft makes good theater. So very quickly, this is London, where sort of early modern theatrical culture actually starts. You might see the only bridge that London had at the time, called the London Bridge. Not much imagination there, and this would have been the bridge that Shakespeare, would have crossed, coming from Stratford and going to London. You have little numbers there. I'm not sure whether you see them. Number one is St. Paul. Before the great the great fire of 1666. Now St. Paul's Cathedral is completely different, but at the time it looked a bit like a Gothic cathedral. And then you would have, for example, number two is the Southwark Cathedral. This is where Shakespeare would have gone. And then 6 and 6 and 6, you see on the bottom. At the bottom, there are all the theaters that were built on that side of the Thames. So the playhouses, and this is the Globe, the reconstructed Globe in 2007. Then, of course, we have, because we always we always think of Shakespeare as an Elizabethan author, but he was also a Jacobean author. His career moves between these two, looking at the time, these two kings, and this is the Armada portrait. This is quite an allegorical portrait, 1588. You will remember that the Spanish fleet is defeated, and so you see the ships there on the left, and then after the storm, the Spanish fleet that is shipwrecks. So these are not realistic portraits, they are portraits of power. These are icons. And this is James I, 1603, 1625, who was had been king of Scotland. And then when Elizabeth dies with no heirs, she wasn't married, she had any children, so they called him, and he became King of England and Scotland. And the Lord Chamberlain's men, Shakespeare's company, became the King's men, because actors needed the protection of a powerful patron, and they would perform at court regularly. And so this is the other this is a reconstruction of the indoor theater that the King's men acquired in 1604. This is the modern reconstruction. It's next to the Globe. It's called the Sam Wanamaker Theatre. It opened in 2014, this was the theatre that the King's men used in the winter. So in the summer they would use the Globe, which is an open playhouse, and in the winter they would use a theatre very similar to this one, and they would probably use machinery, and all these special effects that you need in witchcraft plays would have been more successful here, more interesting here because of the dark, of course, while at the Globe you had all the performances were in daylight. So if you want to build the idea of a dark, scary moment, as in Macbeth, for example, the Blackfriars, the indoor theater, would have been better in a way. And this is why when they built this theater, they revive old plays that worked at the Globe but would have worked much better here. So if we think of, for example, of the initial scene of The Tempest, which of course The Tempest, this is a moment in which theater and magic, this is an example of the first scene, come together. If you remember the plot, Prospero, the magician exiled in this island, decides to take his sort of revenge, not proper revenge, but he wants to remind his brother who has exiled him that he's very powerful. So in the first scene, he conjures up a tempest, but it's not a real tempest because no one is hurt. And then his daughter Miranda is there, and Prospero tells Miranda that what happened in scene 1 was just an illusion, a staged tempest, not a real one, the product of his magical art. So you see here that Prospero is a magician, but he's also, in a way, a man of the theater. So both witchcraft and theater produce illusions. So, you know, in the Tempest, there's a sense that theater and magic are strictly connected. And of course, witchcraft is potentially theatrical. You know, it could include, theatrical effects, special effects, or using props, or acting out rituals, using, you know, candlelight in a certain way. So it's interesting that, you know, we can make a connection between you know, witchcraft and the theater. Let's go back briefly to King James, because you know, as I was saying, we tend to associate Shakespeare with Queen Elizabeth, but he wrote most of his tragedies during King James's reign, including The Tempest, including Macbeth, Othello, and so on. So all plays that have some elements of witchcraft in them. So King James wrote a treatise, Demonology, in 1597 as a response to Scott's discovery of witchcraft, which we saw earlier. You know, to try to confirm that, you know, he wanted people to believe in witches and witchcraft. So it's a very conventional summary of you know, witchcraft beliefs. It's a small book. Of course, when James becomes King of England, this book was reprinted because, of course, the English were very interested in what their new king had written. So the Demonology becomes again a book that, you know, starts circulating again, and it, basically a dialogue between Philomatus, a lover of learning, and Epistemon, a lover of knowledge. And it's interesting that again he makes the connection between women and witches. So why? This is one of the questions. What can be the cause that there are 20 women given to that craft, to witchcraft, where there is one man? The reason is easy, for as the sex is frailer than man is, so it's easier to be entrapped in these gross snares of the devil, as was overwell proved to be true by the serpent's deceiving of Eve at the beginning. So again, it explains is the, you know, the idea of the woman as being weaker, the weaker vessel, so easily deceived by the devil. This is the explanation that is given for the fact that there are more women witches than men witches. And then, you know, this small description of what they do, and they ought to be put to death according to the law of God. This is what the king was writing at the time, because James believed in witches, and this is him presiding a witch trial, because when he was in Scotland, he was involved in a case that had persuaded him that you know, witches were powerful. He married, I mean, his wife was Anne of Denmark, and he had been taking his wife Anne from Denmark, you know, to marry her. And while they were in a ship on their way to England from Denmark, there was a big storm, and they almost shipwrecked. And the women accused. There was then when he presided this trial, the women who were accused of witchcraft told him what his bride and himself had talked about that night. So this is the story, basically. So he believed that the witches could overhear their conversations. So he was a man who strongly believed in witches, in what they could do, and actually in the influence that they might have on his kingdom. So he always took a very keen interest in witchcraft trials, in witchcraft investigations. He sort of self-represented himself as a man who would be able to identify false witnesses. And actually, in a couple of trials, he did. I mean, he did identify witnesses that were lying. And actually, some women were then freed from, were released, women who had been previously accused of witchcraft. But it was not always like that, of course, because in 1621, they arrested a schoolmaster for plotting to influence James by witchcraft, and he was much more severe with that accusation. So, of course, for him, trying to foretell, as I was saying earlier, the end of a reign or controlling a king was high treason. This was beyond witchcraft. It became high treason. And this is precisely what happens in Macbeth, by the way, because in 1606, Shakespeare writes Macbeth. It's a very interesting year for Shakespeare, because he writes also Antony and Cleopatra and King Lear. So can you imagine writing these three tragedies in one year? Another good year was 1599, in which he wrote Hamlet, Henry V, As You Like It. So there are years in his career that are very productive. Anyway, scholars are still debating, and I think in class we talked about that, whether this play, called the Scottish play, because it's bad luck to mention Macbeth in the theater, whether this play is a homage to the king or shows criticism, intends to be criticism of the king. It is definitely a play about kings. There are four kings in Macbeth. So King Duncan at the beginning, Macbeth, then the King of England, and King Malcolm at the end. So everyone is trying to get the crown, and also it's a play about witches trying to foretell the future of kings, or the future to Macbeth. So doing exactly what King James was afraid of. And so you might imagine this play being staged at court, because it was, as I was saying, the king's men were, patronized by the King James. So they had to stage a number of plays at court. So they staged Macbeth at court as well. So can you imagine a Scottish king looking at a play about Scotland, about a Scottish usurper, about a Scottish good king killed by a bad king? So everything is very complicated in Macbeth, and nothing is really black and white in this play. In the play, by the way, witches are called weird sisters. And weird now in contemporary English, weird means strange, not weird man, strange man. But in Old English, in Early Middle English, it meant fateful, about fate. So these weird sisters are also the sisters of fate. So the parke, like the ancient women who were would decide how long somebody's life was, they were sewing. So it's interesting that the name also tells us about something about these witches, who sometimes they behave like village witches, but sometimes they're really prophetesses. They produce oracles. They can shorten men's lives. So and this is the first scene, which, as always, Shakespeare's first scenes introduce the themes and the metaphors that will then return in the play. And this opening disrupts the usual Shakespearean verse. I mean, if you're familiar with Shakespeare's lines, he uses the blank verse most of the time. So it's a 10-syllable verse. Line. So to be or not to be, this is the question. This is a typical blank verse. But here it's a shorter verse. It's a shorter line. And it opens with a question. When shall we three meet again? In thunder, lightning, or in rain? And some impossible situations, like when the battle's lost and won. Can a battle be lost and won? And then in the end, they say, fair is foul and foul is fair. How can fair be foul? So it's, like accepting the opposites in life, you can say. And also, it's a sort of it designs a world of chaos, thunder, lightning. It's during a storm. And then in the second part, they call their familiars, and then they disappear. And this is a play that really defies easy explanations. The witches speak to Macbeth in riddles. They make prophecies that will come true, but not in the way that Macbeth thinks. They are ambiguous in the way they look and in the words they say. So the big question of the play is, where does evil come from? Do they plant a seed of evil in Macbeth? Because in their prophecy, and which we'll see in a second, they will foretell his future as a king. And they already planned something in his mind, because he wants to make the prophecy come true. And so he kills the king and he will replace him. So are they driving him to kill King Duncan? Or maybe they're just giving words to his desire to be king? It's very ambiguous. We really don't know. We know, though, that when Macbeth appears in the play, he's using the witch's words. So foul, a fair, a day I have not seen. So it's as if there was sort of a linguistic contamination, from the witches. So the witches contaminate the linguistic world of Macbeth, but also the moral world of the play. So Banquo, his friend and warrior, describes them as old women, so withered, wild, but not really like human. And so we go back to the liminality. They look not like the inhabitants of the earth, and yet are on it. And then it says, you should be women, yet your beards forbid me to interpret that you are so. So it seems to be also on the verge between men and women. And this is a difficult thing to stage nowadays, because if we put on stage 3 women with a beard, they become, they make you laugh. So they don't give you an idea of liminality, which is a problem that we'll address in a moment. How do you update these codes of horror? And the first part, it's the second part is about their prophecy. So they call Macbeth Thane of Cawdor, and they say, thou shalt be king hereafter. And then the second part of the prophecy is about Banquo, lesser than Macbeth and greater, not so happy, yet much happier. So you see the chaos of the language chaos here. How can it be possible to be not so happy, yet much happier, and so on? And this is one of the big conundrums of Macbeth, of course. But I was saying that it's difficult to stage witches nowadays, because witches must terrify you. And if you put 3 elderly ladies on stage, they may not scare you, because we no longer believe in witches. So you have to think of other ways in which these 2 characters would scare you, would be scary. How do you represent evil? How can they be represented? So here there are 3 ways they are represented in 3 films that we watched in class. And so one is, the 3 nurses are in a film with Patrick Stewart as Macbeth, and these are nurses who kill their patients. So that's scary enough, in my opinion. This is the scariest scene. I think the scariest representation of the witches. Then you have the Roman Polanski just below, and these are, in this movie, they are represented as traditional witches. One is blind, so the gift of prophecy, the seer. And then in the other picture, you have 3 schoolgirls. This is an Australian film based on Macbeth, and so they are evil school children. So there's 3 ways in which you can try to make sense and represent witches nowadays. I mean, I've seen productions in which the 3 witches were 3 dolls, speaking dolls. I mean, think of all the horror films with dolls who kill people. So every director tries to think of a way in which these 3 witches would be scary, but it's not easy. I wanted to say a couple of words about Othello, because Othello is normally not a play traditionally connected to witchcraft, but in this play witchcraft is mentioned twice, and it is always connected to love. The first time is when in the first act, when Desdemona's father cannot believe that Desdemona has fallen in love with Othello, with a black man, an older man. And so he thinks that it must be witchcraft. So he says, for nature so preposterously to err, being not deficient, blind, or lame of sense, as my daughter is not stupid, she's not blind, so it must be witchcraft. So it's interesting that he blames witchcraft. He cannot believe that Desdemona, a white Venetian lady, would fall in love with a black man. And then Othello also sort of appropriates a witchcraft story in which he asks for his handkerchief, of course, handkerchief that, if you remember the plot, has been stolen by Emilia, Iago's wife, and in order to lead Othello to believe that Desdemona has been unfaithful, and he says that this handkerchief is magical. It was given to his mother by an Egyptian, and there's magic in the web of it. And he says then, after this presentation of the handkerchief, that if she loses his handkerchief, she will lose his love. And actually, this is what happens in the play. We all know how the story ends. So I wonder whether there is really magic in the handkerchief after all. And I wanted to finish with the Tempest, another witch. And actually, the witch that is not there, Sycorax, an African witch. And Prospero in the Tempest tells us that she was a witch that trapped the spirit Ariel in a pine tree for 12 years. And then, when he arrived on the island, he freed Ariel, and she was pregnant with Caliban, with her child, and she escaped execution in North Africa, in Algeria, probably because she was pregnant. Sycorax is a witch of the old world, from Africa, like Prospero, who's Italian. And there are a lot of similarities between this witch who dies before Prospero actually lands on the island, so they never meet. But there are a lot of connections between them. They're both banished from their respective homes, Naples, Milan and Algiers. They have a child with them. So it's interesting that they both practice magic on the island, but they never meet. So here the witches is evoked, he's conjured in a sort of a story, and then she disappears. But the witch is important because it raises the problem of the ownership of the island. Who owns the island? Who is entitled to own the island? Who is the king or queen of the island? Because Prospero has been governing, through his magic, he's been controlling all the magical beings on the island. But at some point, Caliban, the son, who is a slave, who Prospero treats as a slave, complains and says, "This island is mine by Sycorax, my mother, which thou takest from me." So it's interesting that this witch could be the first one who moved on the island. So maybe the island is hers. So questions of witchcraft, I think, intersect with questions of ownership, of owning, of property, because actually at the time a lot of new lands were discovered, and people were thinking whether they would be a property of the people who discovered them, or whether the natives were the people who were entitled to to own the island. So Sycorax doesn't appear, but she's there as a story set in the past. So we have here a witch that is sort of topographically removed, banished from the space of the Tempest, marginal. She is so marginal that she's not even there. But again, the witch is always banished. She's always marginal. She's always a figure of otherness, unknowable, liminal. So we have come full circle. We started talking about witches as difficult to classify and liminal, and we end up with Sycorax, unclassifiable, difficult, so marginal that she's not even in the play, and again, liminal. So thank you.
Thank you so much. It was amazing. Again, after a long time, I was
revised.
Yeah, exactly. And it would be my pleasure and honor for sure. Yes, you can see the comments.
Thank you for the little hearts. I really appreciate them.
Oh no. It was our pleasure for sure to have you here. By the way, if do you have any other question, you can turn on your mic and your videos. Sure. Yeah, Nigah, if I'm not wrong. Go ahead.
Hi. Do you have my voice?
Hi. Yep.
First of all, thank you very much for the lecture. It was incredibly insightful and I learned so many new things. I really appreciate the way you explained everything so clearly. I just have a question about Shakespeare. As we read The Tempest, I always have this question in my mind that during Shakespeare time, was being a female witch considered more of a taboo than being a male magician? For example, in The Tempest, we see that Prospero is a male magician and not a woman. Was it something really bad at that time? As you mentioned that they killed witches during the time earlier. Actually, I think it was earlier than Shakespeare, but I just wanted to know that being a witch as a man is as a woman is much much worse than being a man as a kind of witch or magician.
Well, it's interesting that we don't have, well, it depends. There's a difference between representation and actual archival work, because in archives we have mostly female witchcraft trials. I think that King James was right when he said that there were 20 female witches to a man. The idea of the male witch is, it's really, if we think of the male witch as an intellectual magician, then things change a lot, because you can be in danger of being considered somebody who dabbled in black magic, but you would cross a fine line, like Dr. D. He wasn't burned as a witch. So intellectual magic was probably considered, which was of course the domain of men, was considered less dangerous than witchcraft, because of course the problem is always that of maleficium, of proving that the witch has caused harm. You can sort of work with angels and say that you conjure spirits, but if you don't really harm anyone, you may be safe. The problem was when somebody would prove, and actually village witchcraft, village life was hard. There was a lot of gossip. People might start ruining somebody's reputation, in these small villages. So that is, I think, the difference. I don't know whether I replied to your question. There is not one answer. This is what I think, because of course, archival work has, archival material is limited, but it gives us, I think, some insight into things.
Yeah, of course, it was. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your question. Thank you.
Dr. Josephus, first of all, tell me how much time do you have for the question?
Another 15 minutes, perhaps.
Okay, it's great.
Yeah?
Thank you.
Because, I need my sleep because I was in Miami to.
Yeah. I know. So sorry.
So sorry.
Because we have a really different timeline. I know. Yes. So and now Elias, here we go.
All right, can you hear me, guys?
Yeah.
Yep.
All right, hello. Thank you for all the information you gave us. It's a topic that I am honestly sort of unfamiliar with, but everything that you said kind of intrigued me to read more about it. I have one question though. Considering all that you read about witchcraft and the witches, can we say that the role of witches in literature is more like a sort of uh, it is a way to challenge the boundaries of reason?
I think it makes good theater, because the problem with the playwrights is to get people to sit in the theater. So witchcraft always is quite a spectacular event. I'm not sure whether this was challenging some kind of order in the theater. Actually, possibly the contrary. I mean, if you think of the time in which most witchcraft plays are written, they're mostly written at a time in which James is king, not Elizabeth. Possibly they didn't want anyone to make a connection between the queen and a possible witch, powerful. So I'm not sure whether this is the case. I think that witchcraft provided really good theater, and especially in the case of The Witch of Edmonton, it was a real life story. It would interest people, so it's something that is very much into people's consciousness. I mean, they think about witches much more than we do now, because of course they don't, it provides an explanation for a lot of the things that you can't understand, so you couldn't understand. So it's useful, but it's very theatrical, so it works very well in drama. And there are few years in which there are a lot of witchcraft plays, so either from real life, but also from from imagination. Basically, Sycorax is all part of the imagination, of course, this African witch. So
yes, I see.
Difficult,
Thank you.
it's difficult to give you a one answer, because but it's an interesting question. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Have a good one.
Thanks.
By the way, you have your share screen. If you want it, you can stop the share screen, Professor.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
Yes. No, it's fine. Marde, here we go. You can.
Okay, here we go. Yes. Sorry.
Hello to everyone. Hi. Thanks for your great presentation. And I really enjoyed your lecture and came to some viewpoints, and I'd like to share one of them that I thought it's most interesting and most important. And that is the old saying that says knowledge is power. And I think the people in authority thought that magicians and had special kind of knowledge, and they could have the power to control people. And if you could control people, you could own the lands. And I think the cognitive bias here is debatable because of the fear they may have, highlighted their importance, their power, and we are not really sure about how influential they could have been, how effective their spells would have been. So I think it's great field of study to search about how cognitive biases worked in their circumstances and how fear could feed those biases about magicians. And I have a question about how have anybody ever tried to abuse these trials to try some innocent people? Maybe they have did this.
Only a small, following your last question, I think that actually in England, only a small percentage of people are actually in the end sentenced to death. So it has a low percentage of actual, ending badly. So I think I think possibly in the XX trials it's about 23%, which is still high, but it means that 77 were still did not go to execution. So it was it wasn't because in England, the problem was in England there was a sort of a more a system of checks and balances. So you would have to prove something. It was the state who would supervise trials, while in some Catholic countries, and especially in some Catholic principalities in Germany, basically the church prosecutors could do just about anything. So they were not controlled. Well, even, the actually the authors of the Malleus Maleficarum, the Latin treaty, at some point they had to be stopped by the local bishop because they were exaggerating, just putting everyone on trial. So it's interesting that there are two different attitudes. In England, there's still some form of rationality. They need to have some evidence for the trials. We have some trials, some transcripts. We don't have everything, so.
Yeah, exactly.
Thanks for answering that question. And I'd like to add one other point, and the last point, of course, is about a short story called The Good Man Brown. And in that, we have a good story that highlights the history of the author's family, that they have trialed some magicians, and he feels maybe kind of sorry or pity for them. And thanks again for giving me your time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. By the way, we have another one, The Lord of the Butterfly, if I'm not wrong. Yeah, here we go.
What a nice name.
Exactly, nickname.
Hi everyone, and hi Dr. Tasset. Thank you for your wonderful talk and presentation. Since my thesis was on wizards and witches, and because we are connecting you from Iran, and because of religion and the politics, the universities and archives are deprived of any kind of sources. So me as writing, I didn't have that much of information and sources that today you gave me a bunch of great opportunities. First one, I have two questions. First is the obvious one. Is it possible you share your email with us? Because some of us want to reach out to you, ask you some questions and get your insights. Of course, it would be so sweet of you to do it for us. Second one, during my research, I came to the understanding that in old literature, witches and wizards were prohibited. They were scary. But in modern literature, they are welcomed and they are, how can I say, they are applauded, like Harry Potter. Right now, wizarding is a trend. Because of Harry Potter and also other ones. This is my question. Is it a shift in the literature or no? It was in the past, but they were afraid of showing. Right now, it is free and they can just show it and they enjoy it.
Well, there's a difference between witchcraft in real life and witchcraft in fantasy. Okay, in fantasy fiction, they've always been interesting, and of course there's a difference between white magic and black magic, because Voldemort is really scary and there are some bad wizards. So, in fantasy fiction, in fantasy for children or fantasy for young adults, there's always fantasy is based on the fight between good and evil. And of course, we side with the good ones, but they're also the evil ones. And this is fantasy. This is what fantasy is about. If you think of, the Lord of the Rings, there's always a battle between good and evil, which is the battle, the battle of every religion. So I think it's something that is ingrained in fantasy and religion together. And sometimes, they come together too. So, you have to distinguish between what really happened in those 50, 70 years in the world, and then, the imaginative potential of and of course, witches are also part of children's literature and fairy tales. So with the Grimms in the 19th century, you have they are characters in fairy tales, but it's completely, it's a different genre, it's a different period. One is fantasy, one is unfortunately real life. So, but yes, you're absolutely right. I'm a fan of Harry Potter too, so I know.
Great.
Thanks for sharing my email. My email, you can find it in the Venice University website. The thing is that, I'm going to have surgery tomorrow, and for at least a few weeks, I won't be able to answer much. But you can, Zara, you can also ask Rachele, my assistant. She would be happy, I think, to reply to your questions. as you know, at the time, at the moment, I'm not really. And as from tomorrow, I don't think I'll be able to do much, unfortunately, for a while. But thank you for your interest. Thank you so much.
Hope you have a great recovery, and hope
Thank you.
health and the best wishes.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that very much. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And the last question, Zohra, go ahead and super fast. Thank you.
Hello, thank you for your time. And really thank you for your great information, ma'am. I have a question from you, and it is a really big question. Dark magic always belong to women. It's really interesting. And witches were more powerful than wizards. It is really interesting for me because if we assume that English literature was affected by Greek literature, it was like, you know, that we had a lot of gods that were women, but they turned to actually the power of women to, you know, that dark magic. It is really interesting for me. It is it like Christianity thought or something else? It is really big question for me. Thank you for answering.
I didn't pick. I mean, the sound wasn't so good.
Yes, a little bit. The sound, it's not really good. If I'm not wrong.
Can you rephrase, Zara? Maybe you.
Yeah, exactly.
Can I say again?
Oh, now it's much more better.
Much better.
Oh, thank you. I'm sorry. Thank you so much for your time, Mom. I have a question from you. I said we had a lot of witches, a bunch of witches those days. And in comparison with wizards, they were really dark. I mean, that they thought they did always dark things. But wizards were really powerful. If we assume that English literature was affected by Greek literature, you know, it's a like contrast. I mean, that's because we had a lot of gods. They were really powerful, but they turned to bad. Is it a Christianity thought or something else? It is my question. Could you answer it? Thank you.
No, I honestly have no idea. Because really, I mean, even the association good and bad with wizards and witches depends on the period, on the genre. I mean, if you think of I don't know, Disney's Once and Future King, you know, the magician and King Arthur. So it makes also good literature. I'm not sure about the anthropological reading of gods and wizards. I wouldn't know about that interpretation. I don't know. I'm a literary critic. I can't go much beyond this kind of literary and cultural historic interpretations.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much, Mom. Really, I got a lot of information from you, and I really appreciate.
You're very welcome, my dear. Very welcome.
Thank you so much, Professor Tusi. It was really means a lot to all of us because in one case we have more than 75 people here. Yes. And it was really, really appreciated. My honor for sure to accepting my invitation and have you here in our organization. By the way, thank you so much. We cross our fingers for you to become super recover. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Well, take care, everybody, and I'll see you around, Zara.
Yeah, thank you so much. Have a nice weekend. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you so much.